Is Secret Empire any good? There's only one way to find out. I got this there. Ah, so cold. Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and is Secret Empire any good? It's a question that's been weighing on my mind for quite some time now. I've heard a lot of different opinions in both directions. Some people saying it is great, others not so much. Opinions are, at this point, about a dime a dozen, and I've heard terms like divisive and controversial thrown around when talking about Secret Empire, and for once those terms more or less feel appropriate. With that in mind, I wanted to give this Marvel event a fair shake. I've been trying to push away everyone else and all their opinions, and just judge the comic by its own merit. I hadn't actually read Secret Empire until I started on this video. This part was written before I had read the story, in fact. I have read and reviewed the first issue, the number 0 comic that came out a while ago, which you can still find on our channel, and I've read all the comics leading up to it, but I haven't actually touched any issue of Secret Empire as of this writing. I was just so tired of the events at the time that I really needed a break from mainstream Marvel, so I took one look at that issue number 0 and decided to ignore the rest of Secret Empire for the duration of its run. And I'm glad I did so, because by waiting until now, it felt healthy and a way for me to come at it fresh, with an open mind, and one a little less tired of Marvel's nonsense. I've already got a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. I couldn't avoid the spoilers all that much, and didn't really care to try that hard. But it's the journey that matters more than silly plot twists or quote-unquote surprise deaths. So after some extreme effort, I have collected all the main comics, spin-offs, and tie-ins, and having already read all that backstory stuff, I'm ready for this. Let's go over what happens in the comic. After the Cosmic Cube was shattered into a bunch of pieces during a battle between Captain America and the Red Skull, a piece of it was formed into a sentient being known as Kobik. Remembering how it was once used by the Red Skull when it was a complete cube, Kobik took the form of a young girl and approached the Red Skull, seeking shelter. Seizing this opportunity, the Red Skull began to brainwash this little girl, who still contained the almighty power of the original cube, teaching her about Hydra and tricking her into thinking the organization had some positive benefit to society, while the Skull's enemies were standing in the way of humanity's potential. Convinced of the virtues of Hydra and not fully developed or understanding humanity outside of the Red Skull's distorted worldview, Kobik was manipulated into rewriting Captain America's entire history into that of a secret agent for Hydra. Now transformed, Steve Rogers secretly began amassing allies and resources. He overthrew the Red Skull, took over S.H.I.E.L.D., and began a plan to seize control of the United States. Engineering a Chitauri attack, Steve cut off various spacefaring heroes by erecting a barrier around Earth, while also imprisoning Manhattan in the Dark Force dimension, cutting off the majority of heroes in 2 locations, and taking over America as the self-described Hydra Supreme. The takeover of the United States is quick and absolute. Mutants and Inhumans are placed under strict control and monitoring, while kids are educated in school about the virtues of Hydra. The heroes in Manhattan and space are left to fend for themselves against demons and aliens respectively, and a handful of heroes go underground, determined to expose Rogers as a traitor and free the country, setting themselves up in Las Vegas. Hydra Supreme forms his own team of Avengers consisting of heroes and villains manipulated into joining his team. The two sides engage in various gambits to defeat one another. Black Widow begins espionage training with the champions in her own version of the original Soviet training program called the Red Room, reasoning that Steve would rather die than live on as humanity has become. While Tony Stark's AI begins searching for some other fragments of the Cosmic Cube after he discovers what happened to Steve in an attempt to return things to normal. The two sides race around the world seeking the shards while coming into conflict with one another and various factions and nations across the planet. Eventually, Hydra Supreme resurrects the Hulk, temporarily, and uses him to attack the Resistance. The rebel scum barely manages to escape with their lives and their bases destroyed. Hearing this, Black Widow vows to kill Steve Rogers with the champions reluctantly following her. She and Spider-Man set out to do so, but remembering the prophecy from Civil War II where Miles is supposedly destined to kill Captain America, Natasha locks him up in a box that takes on Hydra Supreme herself. Miles escapes containment and joins the fight, only for Natasha to be killed, saving him from an attack by Rogers. Enraged, Spider-Man attacks Hydra Supreme, shattering Man's shield in a single blow and brutally beating the tyrant. However, he's talked down from killing the man thanks to the newest iteration of the hero Wasp, who knows that Natasha wouldn't want Miles to become a killer. With most of the Cosmic Cube fragments now in Hydra's possession, things are looking grim for our heroes, who gather for a massive fight at Washington Monument, after those trapped in Manhattan or space finally manage to escape. The heroes begin to turn the tide with various Hydra allies defecting and joining the battle with the others once they realize what they've done. Hydra Supreme dons an altered Iron Man suit and confronts the heroes, offering them one last chance to destroy Hydra. Logan says no, more fighting happens when suddenly Kobik appears with a new Steve Rogers, not corrupted by Hydra, her memory of the man as he was. The two battle on live television, and seeking an advantage, Hydra Supreme tries to wield Mjolnir. No longer worthy and lacking a spell to use it, the real Captain America is able to instead use the hammer to defeat Hydra Supreme. Kobik restores changes made to history, everyone celebrates, and America is rebuilt while the political changes of Hydra are undone. Hydra Supreme is taken prisoner where he insists he technically did not commit any crimes. All the power was given to him willingly, and many people followed him without question. Captain America says he will pay for the people that he killed, although the epilogue suggests that Black Widow may have lived anyways. And knowing that Hydra will return one day, likely with Hydra Supreme in tow, Cap only replies that they will always be ready. As he leaves, one of Hydra Supreme's guards whispers to him, "Hail Hydra." Oh god, I drank so much of that in so few takes. I feel like I just read Secret Empire. Alright, so I've got a lot of thoughts about this thing. Let's start with the art. With a giant range of artists covering both the main series and many tie-ins, a lot of people put some great work into Secret Empire. By and large, they did a great job, too. This is actually part of a larger trend in recent years when it comes to Marvel and these big events. The artists have really been putting in some solid effort here. Andrea Sorrentino is the main artist behind this event, if we are to assign a single person to that role. The best 2 panels in the entire event were done by him, including this mind-boggling page signifying the early spread of Hydra into American society, and this brutal page depicting Black Widow's death. That second image really sticks with me. They used the whole Mortal Kombat X-ray thing, and it really signifies how savage and aggressive this death was, very nicely punctuating the moment. That being said, Sorrentino's very stylish look feels a bit at odds with the tone of this comic, which feels like it should be more grounded and realistic. I definitely would have preferred a more detailed, crisp look, to better reflect the nature of this event. In fact, in a lot of ways, I do feel that Sorrentino's heavy use of style and impressionism kind of holds this comic back. The cerebral art style works better in comics like Old Man Logan, which feel more surreal and vivid, like we're experiencing Logan and his gradual slip into old age and him losing control of the world around him because of it, and just like losing his grip on reality even. It works really well with stuff like that. A lot of his work has a dreamlike quality to it that I don't think blends well with this story as much as it could. It kind of works in a certain sense, as the world around Hydra just feels increasingly less like ours, and that could work as an effect. Aspects of it work very well, in fact. In the more insane moments of the comic, it does feel out of this world and crazy, as it should. But it also works against this series in subtle little ways, most especially in that it doesn't convey facial expressions as well as it could and should in certain scenes. We need to have these big emotional reactions to this betrayal from Steve Rogers, and a lot of times, and I don't think we get the facial expressions that this story kind of needed. The tie-ins have a lot of great artists, reflecting the strong talent pool in Marvel overall within the art department. There's a lot of variety, and certainly not all of the art is going to speak to everyone equally, but I don't think anyone would argue the artists aren't competent in doing interesting work here. The event's art doesn't really feel rushed ever, not with anyone, which can happen in big crossovers, and doesn't happen here. In this regard, Secret Empire overall gets good marks for their art. While I might have issues with the choice of people and style, everyone did a good job, and there's a lot of great panels to enjoy here. Compared to other company-wide events, it's definitely above average. It's not the best I've seen from Marvel or DC for stories like this, in recent or past memory, but it does a good job more than it doesn't. The only thing that ever really bothers me are a handful of design choices. Like, this isn't necessarily the fault of Secret Empire, but I hate the god-awful look of that Hank Pym Ultron fusion. I think it's a cool idea for these two to be fused together, but the split face just looks so dumb to me. But that's minor, and by and large, the art impressed me more than it didn't. Now, the look and the feel of the comic is important, vital, in fact, but when it comes to Secret Empire, the real thing that's going to make it or break it is the story. This is where I'm most conflicted, and I really understand now why this story has been divisive. The issue is not so much about the politics of the comic. If you disagree with the politics of Secret Empire, I can't help you. You're just wrong. It's all just a big, obvious metaphor for why Death Eaters are bad, and we should never endorse the political ideas and ethnocentrism that Death Eaters represent. That's the problem, though. Secret Empire wants, and very much tries to deal with and reference current-day politics, while also being a timeless story of a group of heroes rising up against fascism. But the comic is kind of neither. When you really boil it down, there isn't really any message more coherent than Death Eaters are bad, yo. Which is perfectly fine, but that's not a controversial statement. And I don't care what some idiots think. The vast majority of the developed world learned this lesson a long time ago. And if you want to talk about how this lesson could be used right now in America, well, I have news for you. You aren't going to win them over with this comic book. These aren't exactly the kind of people that listen to reason or logic. They aren't going to listen, so all this comic is going to do is just preach to the choir. Preach to the majority of Americans who know this nonsense is bad. Because it's not really a statement on conservatives or even Trump supporters. Most of those people are not Death Eaters. Oh, some are. No argument there. But the people like that aren't about to be convinced that fascism is wrong just because Iron Man says so. They aren't going to if they haven't learned this lesson from Star Wars, Injustice, Secret Wars, Avatar The Last Airbender, The Hunger Games, 1984, V for Vendetta, The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie, Watch Dogs, BioShock, BioShock Infinite, The Walking Dead, Harry Potter, Escape from LA, Tron, Total Recall, Richard III, The Last King of Scotland, Blade Runner, The Great Dictator, Indiana Jones, Star Trek, Killzone, Wolfenstein, Animal Farm, Doctor Who, and this random clip of The Simpsons from 12 years ago that somehow really feels relevant for this video.
Dad, don't act like Mussolini.
Oh, I thought I was doing Donald Trump.
Do you get what I'm saying? It's trite. Literally, that's the best possible definition of Secret Empire I've come up with. Overused and consequently of little import, lacking originality or freshness. Thank you, dictionary. I couldn't have put this better myself. If you don't have anything original to say about Death Eaters other than that they're wrong and we should oppose them, then what's the point? Why bother with any of this political nonsense at all if you aren't going to have anything new to contribute to the conversation? If you don't have anything serious to say, just have fun with the idea. And that's one of the biggest problems I have with Secret Empire, from the very beginning. I had this feeling this was going to be the problem, and wasn't surprised to see it was very much the case. It's just a lame, easy political point, but it takes itself way too seriously not to just have fun with Marvel fighting Death Eaters. The annoying thing is that there's a glimmer of something new and original in these comics. It just wasn't fully realized. See, I think there is something compelling to a story that shows how subtly Death Eaters and their ideology can creep into a society. Life goes on under the rule of mighty Lord Voldemort. Food stays in stores, people keep coming and going to work, life stays normal, usually for a very long time. By the time things get so bad that there's this oppressive violence in the streets, people battling for freedom, it's usually way too late. The takeover and loss of freedom can be slow and subtle, and people are often very good at concealing their Death Eater beliefs from the general public for a very long time, only tipping their hand slowly as it becomes more acceptable. That actually isn't shown in a lot of media and really could have been something original and unique for Secret Empire to do if they wanted to take this serious political angle. But I cannot stress how little of that we get in this comic. In fact, Hydra's takeover is anything but subtle. It's loud and pronounced. It is ridiculously, obviously, cartoonishly evil, to the extent that anyone would recognize it for what it is. A dictatorial, aggressive, kind of racist, sudden takeover of America. It's hard to believe the public would have accepted this, not as the comic presents things. So the rebellion and fight against Cap is an easy choice, as it becomes unrealistic that any of the heroes would accept this sort of thing. And yes, I get comparisons can be made to the modern age, that's all on purpose, but there's something very dishonest about this. There's nothing easy about Death Eaters, and we do a great disservice to the public if we oversimplify the issue like we do here. There was this version of the story I wish I could have seen where the takeover of America was a lot less pronounced, and much more sinister because of it. See, this comic starts with Captain America already in command of S.H.I.E.L.D. Instead of it immediately having him seize an entire country and kick all these heroes out, making him an obvious and clear villain, they should have shown him slowly taking over, slowly getting more and more authority towards S.H.I.E.L.D., slowly building up and using false flag operations to expand his power until people don't realize that he's taken over. Let our heroes become fugitives, scorned and rejected by the world for not seeing something that almost no one can see. Don't call him Hydra Supreme. Keep him as Captain America and keep having people cheer him on and follow him right up to and beyond the bitter end. Have people genuinely convinced nothing is wrong and failing to see warning sign after warning sign, because who could possibly expect the symbol of freedom would be used as the avatar of its very destruction? I get excited talking about the idea of that story, because it could have worked so well, and if they had done anything like that, I think I'd be giving this comic a lot more credit. Because we'd have these people working with Cap and thinking they're doing the right thing, only for them to realize how badly they've been misled, while others just would refuse to see it, even as this overwhelming evidence would start to mount up, until it was far too late to do anything about it. It would help signify the betrayal these heroes should feel. To be fair, Secret Empire does quite a bit of this character work and does it well. In that regard, this comic does a reasonably good job at these things. We get a strong sense of the betrayal felt by the heroes a couple of times in ways that really work well. Tony has a great encounter with Cap where he's actually apologetic for not protecting his friend after the first Civil War and feeling really bad about the whole thing. Black Widow has some great character moments throughout the entire story, as cliche as her death might be. More on that later. But she has a really well-formed character arc throughout this event. And I just really appreciate the moment where she just realizes that she has to kill her friend because of what he's become. That was well done. Unlike Marvel's last big event, her death was actually set up and paid off too. And although it is utterly inconsequential, as always, it was still handled a lot better than the deaths from Civil War II with Tony and Hulk, who by the way are both in this story. Great job at keeping consequences a thing, Marvel. Oddly enough, the best character work is done with Deadpool. That was quite the surprise, but they did a really good job at what I was getting at earlier, showing him, a man who really wants Captain America's approval, putting his faith in the man only to slowly realize how bad that decision really was. It's sad. I feel really bad for this character, and this story within Secret Empire might be the best out of all the characters in the entire event. I did not expect that. Secret Empire doesn't do enough of this stuff, though. I'm listing exceptions rather than the rules of the event. A lot of characters hardly do anything at all, or just don't work. The Punisher, for example, agrees to work with Rogers for the most stupidest, naive reasons I've ever heard, in what might very well be one of the dumbest moments in that character's history. And that's saying something for a guy who used to work with literal actual angels. In general, Secret Empire doesn't spend as much time on its characters as it should. They are way more focused on action, and that's okay for an event. In fact, it could have been a lot of fun to do like a anti-Death Eater event, like Wolfenstein or something like that. Yeah, our heroes kicking Death Eater butt. Take that, Lord Voldemort. Your ethnic genocide won't happen today. But it really just boils down to heroes fighting heroes, as if we haven't all gotten enough of that in the last 10 years. And if they aren't fighting each other, they're fighting a handful of villains and nameless Hydra soldiers. It's boring. Profoundly and utterly boring. And though I do like the art overall, I can't tell you how stale the final issues were, filled with pages and pages of the same stupid panels depicting the sprawling cast fighting one another, as if we haven't seen that in every single crossover Marvel has ever made. It's predictable. Widow's death in particular stands out as an example of this, as evidently Marvel has lost any ability to raise the stakes in the event without killing a random hero off. I find that especially grating considering the lame story Civil War II hangs over this thing like an inconvenient ghost, not providing consequences from that story, just minor inconveniences that highlight how pointless comic book deaths really are. Tony died last event, but that hardly matters at all since he has a fully functional AI throughout this entire story. Banner is dead, but brought back to life for reasons beyond my comprehension, since his appearance basically adds nothing to the actual story. So it's Black Widow's turn to die this time around, because I guess it's even then, the comic can't even commit to killing their big character off, and Black Widow's return is inevitable. When we talk about these beats of this story, I am reminded of how cheap they are. And what I mean by that should be expanded on a little bit. In every story, a writer has a sort of budget they should be aware of. That budget is the amount of narrative trickery that you can pull in any given story. before it starts to really affect what people think of that story. Those narrative tricks can take many forms. Sometimes you need to retcon something, changing the circumstances of a prophecy to keep your characters intact. Sometimes you need to bring an old character back even though they just died or were changed in some fundamental way. Sometimes you need a deus ex machina to wrap up everything quickly. Any number of those tricks are actually perfectly fine, but if used in excess, if used with too many other tricks, they will compromise a story very quickly, and pretty soon the cheap gimmicks are all anybody talks about when they talk about your event. Now that budget changes not only from person to person, but also depending on what type of story is being told. For example, comedy doesn't have to worry about this as much because they generally don't take themselves too seriously, and don't expect that of you, the audience. A drama, on the other hand, is serious, and writers need to be a lot more careful about how much they can cheat the reader, so to speak. Secret Empire clearly wants to be taken at least somewhat seriously, so to me, it really feels cheap when it's chock full of these narrative tricks. We have resurrections, comic book deaths, and the worst example of this trickery of all, Steve Rogers being recreated and defeating his evil counterpart. It's all very cheap, but that moment, hand-waving all the potential problems and ramifications away, I'm doing some very rapid gestures you can't see right now, with a sweeping wave of the cosmic cube, absolving Rogers of any possible sin or guilt over everything that has happened. It's also worth mentioning the sheer amount of time we waste on this new Steve Rogers running around in Coburg's imagination throughout the entire core series. Those scenes are utterly pointless and a waste of time in a series I would definitely consider way too long to begin with and in desperate need of serious cuts in editing. Why are these scenes here at all? I didn't need them in my summary. What's the point of them? They don't do anything other than set up Cap's return, which we could have done in a single scene, and had Kobik doing something else, and having a point in the story beyond just being a easy way out and in. I don't like Kobik. It makes the already questionable ending that much more questionable, and shows just how there is absolutely no reason for this core series to be a total of 11 issues long. Yes, number 0 counts. And that's ridiculous given how thin this plot really is. A really long, complicated event can afford to be that long, but Secret Empire wastes time in every single issue. And after all this time we waste, Hydra ends up overthrown so easily and in such a rushed way. If anything, this comic massively distorts the difficulty and challenges associated with Death Eaters and getting rid of them. It reads like a high school level political science report, where all our heroes need to do is work together to save the day. That's fine in a comic made for fun and enjoyment, or say, a story about Death Eaters specifically aimed at children, and actually does deal with some of the difficulty in that even then. But for something clearly made for an older audience, you need a better sense of traction and purpose, especially in 2017. And while I do like how the lead writer here, Nick Spencer, kind of makes that apparent by not killing off Hydra Supreme and making it clear that he has plenty of followers, many of whom are willing and not brainwashed or anything, the whole idea of everything just immediately going back to normal feels like yet another example of how cheap this comic really is. If I haven't made this point clear, there's nothing wrong with politics in comics, and I do at least applaud Marvel for wanting to have a political message in a big event like this. There are only two things I'm saying in this video I would consider indisputable and above any sort of debate. Death Eaters are bad, and Marvel is and always has been a deeply political line of comics. If you disagree with either of those things, you clearly don't know a thing about Marvel, and I really wouldn't consider you a true fan. Unfortunately for Secret Empire, the history of Marvel Comics and their politics actually make this story look worse though, since the older political comics do a way better job at it than this one at addressing these very same issues. Consider for a moment Marvel 2099, a series of comics that came out a few decades ago depicting a corporate-controlled world in the year 2099. Filled with overt and obvious political references and themes, these comics, including one series written by Stan Lee himself, have far more to say about the current political climate in America than Secret Empire could ever dream of. And that's borderline unacceptable. For all the hot takes and complaints about Marvel going SJW, I found Secret Empire a bland, timid political piece that doesn't even compare to the real-world social justice woven into the fabric of Marvel's very origins. This is baby's first politics book compared to some of the other stuff out there these days, even from Marvel itself, let alone the company's own past, which was, for its time, radical and definitely preachier than this. There was a time, probably around when the first Secret Empire came out actually, when this would have made waves and would have gone down in history as a classic Marvel comic. But times change. Stories get told and retold until ideas get old and lose their impact, if not delivered in a new or interesting way, or if not presented in anything to make them more original. I'm not saying Secret Empire should have been more like the older political comics. I'm saying it should have been less like that. More original and forward-thinking, and thinking about what ideas and culture has developed since that time. And they have. They very much have. If you look at the art that leads the way in the comics, they are more advanced and subtle and nuanced and smarter than the original comics that started the Marvel Stan Lee train that still runs to this day. But that's one of the most fundamental questions of any story. What does it have to say that hasn't been said before? Who is this story for? I don't have an answer to these questions when it comes to Secret Empire, and that's a big problem. If it was just meant for fun, it would have been a lot easier to ignore all this stuff I was just talking about, but that's not the case. If it's fun and goofy, it doesn't have to be as original, because as long as people enjoy reading along the way, what's the harm? And there isn't any harm to Secret Empire. But Secret Empire is very serious and is clearly trying to make a serious point. But again, I'm just not impressed by Death Eaters are bad. It's not an important lesson we haven't seen before. And this ain't aimed for kids. There's no way this is aimed for kids. So you can't just have a simple lesson. Maybe in the world of America, which I do not live in, this is a rallying cry for people who feel this sort of resistance is especially relevant in this day and age. Certainly, Nick Spencer has said that's what he intended. And there's a lot of references to the current administration to back that up. But I can't help but point out those other comics I've mentioned in this video, those other stories and movies, are better examples of heroes standing up to this sort of thing in a more inspiring and interesting way without being so goddamn obvious about it either. You should check out Injustice for a more fun version of this story. Even Civil War and Secret Wars have a lot of great content with political themes to it that I think are way more original and thoughtful than what we see in Secret Empire. By the way, Secret Wars, Secret Empire, Secret Invasion, great at keeping your brand super confusing, Marvel. It's all made me really question Nick Spencer's writing on a fundamental level I don't often do with writers. Look, he's talented and has done some great stuff before, but I've seen this before. I've seen him throw in a million side plots, wasting a ton of time on all of them, and only having half the stuff winding up being thoughtful or entertaining. Let alone something worth keeping in a story and not editing out during production. To be fair, a lot of great writers struggle with big events like this, and we don't know to what degree Marvel's management got their sticky fingers on things. That being said, if anything, I don't think this comic was actually edited or controlled enough. There's no reasonable excuse for the comics core series being so long when there's so much I would have cut out. And I'm not some perfect authority figure, I just don't understand why half of the scenes are in the story. And though I like some of the tie-ins, most were pretty unnecessary and just added to the unwanted bulk of Secret Empire. This is a neat idea, kind of, if we ignore the fact that Superior Spider-Man, Superior Iron Man, Axis, and Injustice have basically all done this thing before within the last few years. I think this would have worked better as a limited miniseries 4 or 5 issues long, like what they're basically doing over at DC with that Nightwing thing, which is basically just this but only 4 issues long. There isn't enough content in Secret Empire to justify the runtime, and I really think the only reason this big company-wide event exists as a big company-wide event is because Marvel had to. And Marvel had to because they always have to. They have to do this every year. So, I don't know who this story ends up being for besides them. Mandated event number 102 billion, whatever. It could have been a more serious political drama if it went in that direction I mentioned earlier, showing the creepy, subtle effects of fascism, or Death Eaters. Or it could have been a fun superhero adventure about a group of heroes rising up to defeat a tyrant. I would have preferred the more serious political comic only because it would be more fun. And the superhero version has already been done better by the Injustice comics, which perfectly strikes the tone of having fun, though keeping in some of the political overtones without hammering them into the audience like some sort of pretentious snot. Secret Empire tries to do both of these things, being a fun superhero story and a tight political thriller, and kind of fails at both because of it. There's a million ways they could have resolved this, maybe not making this a giant event or not making it overblown, but if it went in that more fun direction, people would compare it more to Injustice. And if it went the more serious political route, it probably would have gotten depressing for being so big and so long. And that's the biggest problem of the comic. It doesn't know where it wants to exist in this continuum. If it wanted to be the big, overblown, fun thing, yeah, they could have done that, but that's not very original. So it should have been serious and political and smaller. I cannot stress that enough. Marvel tends to have the problem of only ever doing things one way, and this is a good example of that. They needed to have this event be a little toned down, a little less tie-ins, a little shorter, but I would be surprised if they considered anything other than this big event for Secret Empire, because that's what they do every year. Secret Empire was clearly a commercial success, so why wouldn't Marvel do the same thing over and over again if they keep getting rewarded for it? But I'm sick to death of it, and when we look at the smaller, more limited runs of the big events we see from DC these days, they're looking better and better every day. Event fatigue is really starting to hit me, even after taking this long break before starting Secret Empire. And the constant barrage of these events are starting to blur together in my head, especially since the plot structure and production of them are basically the same every time. Before this event started, Bleeding Cool put out a list of tropes making fun of Marvel's usual approach to these events, and I kid you not, almost every single one of these, Secret Empire actually did. And that feels not only predictable, but incredibly lazy. As if Marvel had just gotten so used to doing these things that they're producing them as if they're part of an assembly line. I don't know if DC is actually more organic, but I'll take Metal, Justice League vs. Suicide Squad, and the upcoming Doomsday over anything Marvel has done since Secret Wars any given day of the week. Whether or not that's because they are doing these things more naturally or just because they're doing them better and smarter, I don't know, but all I can tell you is the end result is whatever DC is doing is working better. It is at this point I feel I should mention this rather scathing review shouldn't make you feel bad for liking Secret Empire. A lot of people like it, and they aren't stupid or wrong for enjoying this or ignoring the things that I am annoyed about it. It's not garbage. In fact, I really can understand the argument for liking this. I want to stress this point. In spite of my problems with Secret Empire, in spite of these deep flaws, it still does well compared to the average Marvel crossover. I liked it more than Civil War II, or Secret Invasion, Age of Ultron, or even Original Sin. In fact, I'd go so far to say it's one of Marvel's better crossovers. Not as good as the first Civil War, Secret Wars, or even something kind of middle of the road like Avengers vs. X-Men. But it's not bad either, not by any measure. Its problems put it in mediocre territory. But the fact that it had so much potential for being this cool political thriller, and not really being that politically coherent at all, really sticks out for me as a sore thumb. It's easier for me to ignore the problems of Age of Ultron because it's not that serious or smart to begin with. Secret Empire wants to be better than that, and I wish it actually was. So we're going to say it one more time, because I have to make this point and it's very important. Secret Empire is not bad. I must stress that because I feel like I'm taking it down on rather harsh terms. But just because I have some strong criticisms about it doesn't make it outright bad. Like I said, I like that they're having this discussion. I like that they're not being just another boring time travel event or something silly like that. That could be fun, but doing something serious and smart is unique. I just wish it was more serious and smart. Especially smart. I wish this was a more nuanced, intelligent comic when it came to some of the tropes from their own events. Just the same, I can name a dozen other crossovers that don't try anything nearly as ambitious as Secret Empire, and that is worth saying. I look at reviews for this thing online, and it seems like people really like the first half of this event, and got to my more mediocre mood by the second half. In the end, I do kind of follow the trend of these reviews. early on we do get some pretty good attempts at political commentary. Stuff that I kind of only came to appreciate as I was deep into the editing of this video, actually. But things fall flat really quickly, and I find a lot of my criticisms especially apply to the latter half of this story. In spite of that, I think I do actually recommend it. Yeah, in spite of all the things I've said about it, my big problems with it likely have to do with the fact that I've read a lot of the comics and stay up to date on related media. So, because I've read all these events, they are going to start to seem the same, and it is going to come across as very repetitive to me. Same thing with the themes of authoritarianism and those ideas. They might not seem repetitive to you. Maybe this story will become important. And it's not nearly bad enough to write that off as a possibility. In a lot of ways, it really comes down to this comic just not working for me, but it's ambitious and tries to do a lot of things that a lot of these other big banner events would never try to do. In part, this has to do with me as an individual as well. I'm really getting tired of politics in the real world in that situation, so these days I prefer stories and events that are a bit more of an escape. This is why DC Metal is doing so well in my eyes and hitting the tone of just being a really fun event. It doesn't really have the politics of Secret Empire, but that's a benefit more than anything I'd consider a weakness to that story. And if we're going to talk about new stuff that is actually adding to the general canon of the comic books, DC Metal does that way better than Secret Empire, even if it doesn't have the political depth to it that Secret Empire at least tries to have. So if you really like this event, that's fine. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I do like being able to discuss the themes of authoritarianism and modern politics here, even if I don't feel that the Secret Empire quite fully explored those ideas. Hence the conflation with Death Eaters for the video that I've been doing. Because in a lot of ways, the way Hydra is treated is a child's lesson. We need to dig deeper than that as adults. And maybe part of that is that this story was written before 2017 really happened. I don't really consider it a good sign when something like Jimmy Kimmel has more edge than the entirety of Secret Empire, and that's a bit of an issue. It's not offensive. I can't help but feel annoyed at that attitude. The whole idea of people needing to be offended on my behalf because they turned Captain America into a fake Nazi, that's silly. But there is something to be said about the symbolics of it all. I think Marvel could have gotten away with a lot more if they hadn't have made Cap the front and center of all this, but by taking this symbol of American freedom and corrupting him, there is something to be said about, even though Marvel's aware of what they're doing here, and it's very much part of the story, it is also kind of crummy. It does get a little depressing and a little too much after a while. So, at some point I need to stop this video. This story did send me into a bit of an intellectual spiral. I could just keep going with this because there's so much to say about it and to explore, both in terms of pros and cons. At some point I just have to stop. Even that, though, should be noted, because that's not true for every comic book story. There's enough depth behind the story, more than we get in the average crossover, that allows for a deeper analysis, a deep dive, if you will, and I really do appreciate that out of Secret Empire. This is the kind of story you should read for yourself, because even if you don't like it, there's something to discuss out of that. It is not without value, even if you don't like the story or the politics behind it. If you think that's too heavy-handed, look, I don't disagree with you, but at the very least, you're going to have to see that and explore that for yourself. So, to review, I think Secret Empire is boring, trite, kind of pointless, cheap, stupid, silly, boring again, and one of the best modern Marvel crossovers ever made. I do kind of recommend it. So thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our Patreon page if you'd like to support us making more videos. I do want to do more of these deep dive videos, so definitely let me know if you have any suggestions for more videos along those lines in the comment section below. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.